going to invite our final speaker before the panel. So Angela Wyatt, Horizon 7. Just by way of background, the last time you spoke at one of our events in person was pre-pandemic, and we hosted an event called the Death of the RFP. And I guess actually that conversation was the beginning to, this whole movement towards Agile, was changing the RFP process and what was wrong with the RFP process and how we needed to become more Agile. So we're really interested to hear your journey and what's developed since that event, which must have been over 4 years ago. So over to you now, Angela, and thank you.
Thank you, Kerry. Can you see my slides?
Yeah, perfectly. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you. Hi, everybody. Really interesting discussions from David, Rosalind and Sandrine, and just to try and pull some of that together. I thought I'd start with the, why do Agile sourcing? And I think just, as sourcing professionals, we know, RFPs are great at comparing apples and apples. Our research shows that actually, what makes successful sourcing is not just, running a great process, having a great contract, having great governance, but is actually some of the softer factors, the relationship, the culture, the language, the teamwork. And those things, it's very, very difficult, if not impossible, to assess through the traditional RFP process. So, that's the kind of why. I'm a great believer in start with the why. And David talked about the process of Agile sourcing, and I think we're all probably familiar on the call with the general approach, but some of the things I'd like to pull out in terms of my experience and what really makes Agile sourcing successful. So I'd like to kind of work through the process. I've got a few slides, but I'm just going to pull out some of the key themes, both those that have already been highlighted to kind of summarize those, but also perhaps some of the different perspectives that Horizon 7 would bring. So if we look at the very beginning of the sourcing process, we would always start with a very clear understanding of why. Why are you doing this? What is it that you want as an outcome from this process? And to use that as the North Star along the entire process, making sure that every step of the way you are aligned to that direction. There's a danger that, and I think, some organizations, this has happened, that Agile just means lack of discipline, lack of structure, will kind of muddle through this. And I think, that absolutely is not the case in a well-run Agile sourcing process. And it is a fully auditable, managed process. So beginning with the end in mind, starting with those desired outcomes and a business case, set the bar, work out what good looks like before you start. So that you're not led by, the kind of iterative process and end up with a diluted benefit case based on, where the suppliers have taken the discussion. I think Sandrine and Rosalind talked about the importance of building capability and coaching. And even, in experienced and capable procurement teams, I think the importance of coaching, coaching suppliers, coaching clients. These are the kind of things that most client organizations don't do for breakfast. And so, just discussing with everybody why you're doing it, what the purpose of the sessions is, how they evaluate them, and also coaching suppliers. I mean, Rosalind talked about supply side, and we do a lot of work supply side, and this process has been developed also with suppliers. I have a slide on a supplier perspective a little bit later. But, coaching everybody to make the process a success. I think David talked about engaging the legal teams early, making sure the contracts and schedules are developed proactively. And we would actually say remove all sales documentation from the process. that they generate no value in terms of a sourcing process. We're all familiar with entire agreement clauses that go into contracts that say unless it's in the contract, it doesn't count. And so really you should be driving the process by delivering artifacts that can ultimately be subsumed into the contract. And I'll come back to Agile contracting, which Sandrine and Rosalind talked about. In terms of the engagement and shortlisting, David talked about the importance of early market engagement, getting suppliers involved. I think there is a risk that these processes can become very heavy and difficult for suppliers, and so we would condone very quickly getting down to a small number of suppliers, so 3 to 4 being the optimal number, to go into an agile sourcing process, and therefore you may need a shortlisting process, particularly if you're running a public sector procurement where you have to advertise on OJU or FTS to invite bidders. You need a very clear process, an efficient process, and if possible, as David mentioned, technology-enabled process to be able to do that shortlisting and to minimise the time on suppliers until you get into the collaborative and immersive part of the process. And also managing internal stakeholders, I think, is important. Making sure that they are aligned to the process, that they understand the decisions, because this is sort of fast and furious way of working, making sure that the governance is lined up, that you know how decisions are going to be made, ratified, etc. internally before you start that process. And then as you get into the collaborative and agile ways of working, the data room, my first slide talked about the importance of having a well-populated data room to minimise the kind of due diligence risk later in the process. But because, again, you're working at pace, making sure that you have the SMEs lined up to respond to questions, to provide additional data, to clarify data in the data room. We all talked about the importance of collaboration and co-creation, and in some procurement teams, that is a difficult cultural shift, moving to the synergistic win-win ways of working from, perhaps the archaic, sort of win-lose procurement approaches. And, I'm not suggesting for a moment that people on this call fall in that camp, but there are individuals within our industry who are still of that kind of win-lose, beat the supplier mentality. This is a very different and very significant shift, as has been discussed. I think ensuring that the supplier delivery teams are in the workshops, not the sales teams. We don't want the bright, shiny suits. We want the real people who are going to be there on the ground delivering for the client. And building those relationships and cultural understanding, etc. We talked about sales deliverables, evaluation kind of after each session, but against objective criteria. As I say, I've run this numerous times in the public sector, and in that, in particular, the importance of being very clear about the evaluation mechanism, and particularly, as you start to down select through the workshop processes. Making sure that that is very clear, very objective, and can be defended if appealed, if necessary. Contract finalisation. We talked about the importance of early contracting. Sprint-based contracting. Sandrine talked about, an approach to contracting, and I could run a whole other session, but where the future is undefined. So don't seek certainty where there isn't any. Focus the contract on the things that matter, the relationship, the desired outcomes, the overall ways of working, and contract for what you know, and provide an overall mechanism for future contracting as the future becomes more certain. Making sure that during the competitive process you remove the deal breakers with the suppliers, that ultimately you've done the contracting process whilst you are going through the workshop process, so that really at the end you're just looking at dotting I's and crossing T's. And of course the all-important alignment with the desired outcomes and the business case that we talked about. I wanted to very quickly talk about the supplier view, because we at Horizon 7 do work with and very much respect suppliers, and their input and feedback has shaped our agile sourcing processes and technologies. And what we hear from suppliers is that actually a highly engaged and informed client leads to a better engagement, and they love the freedom to be creative with the client face to face, rather than having to respond to a set of documented requirements in an RFP at arm's length. And I think the benefit for the supplier, that the whole proposition is understood by the client, but also, from the client's perspective, is understood by the supplier delivery teams. This isn't a shiny sales offering. This is something that has been developed with sweat, blood, and occasionally tears through the workshop process. So everybody gets it, everybody understands it, and is vested in the success of that solution. And we talked about how this means that the ways of working and the culture and the teams that are built and so on can be evaluated alongside the contract and, with a traditional RFP process, price. The fact that suppliers are engaged and shortlisted quickly and efficiently means, when they're called to invest in the process, they can have a lot more confidence about it. They're down to the last 3 or 4, they can invest in it, and they know it'll be a well-run and efficient process, where they have a much higher chance of winning. So actually, for them, it's fast. Yes, it involves time and energy, but only for a small number of qualified suppliers. And it's far less likely, if it's managed well, to derail or miss its deadline. So actually, suppliers like the process and respond well to it. I think Rosalind and Sandrine talked already about, this isn't an either or. Yes, there are the polar extremes, but of course there is the ability to adopt a hybrid model that takes some of the benefits of Agile and brings it in alongside a more traditional RFP. So, there are ways of moving towards this. It's not just an either or solution. And my final slide, I just wanted to touch, I'm not sure if there's anyone on the call who is from public sector, but just to reiterate that this absolutely can operate within the public sector OJU or FTS processes. And typically we would run it through the competitive dialogue channel of the OJU regulations. And have done so, very successfully. So you needn't be restricted from the benefits of agile sourcing because your procurement is OJU regulated. So that was where I wanted to finish, Kerry. So over to you, I think, to chair the questions.
That's great. Thank you. That's really, really informative. Thank you so much.